listener, and welcome to the Metacast Crypto Corner, brought to you by Naavik. I'm your host, Nico Vereecke, or Nico for short, and today I have the absolute pleasure to be joined by Robby Yung, CEO at Animoca Brands. Robby, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Hi, Nico. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. And I'm especially excited to have you on because as a member of the crypto gaming team at Bitcraft, I often get asked a lot of very difficult questions, and now I can just pass those over to you and get your thoughts. Let's dive right in. How do you usually describe Animoca Brands to someone outside of the crypto and the gaming industry?
Sure. I think the short and sweet is I tell them we make games, and then I think what I try to do is I say to them what we're doing is we're making games in a new area which is at the intersection of blockchain and entertainment, because blockchain games are kind of a new thing for most people, but for us I think it's what we live for at this point, because for us it's a very, very exciting time where games and the internet in general are undergoing a huge transformation as a result of the implementation of blockchain. So we think that we're kind of on the cutting edge of this transformation in the game industry.
Couldn't agree more. But Animoca Brands wasn't always so focused on blockchain gaming, right? At some point a few years ago, you made a pivot. Could you tell a bit more about what you were doing before that, and then why you decided to make this shift?
Sure. So we've been involved in games in one way or another for a very long time, probably 20 years, and more so for Yat, our co-founder. And we had, we'd made some PC games and console games, but that was not the primary business. And then in 2009, we officially, Yat, the co-founder, sold his previous enterprise messaging business and focused exclusively on games. And as you'll recall, that was the dawn of mobile. So the focus there was to do mobile gaming, and we were primarily a casual free-to-play studio. And so we built, I think, quite a healthy franchise around casual free-to-play games on mobile, particularly focused on the area of brands, hence the name of the company, because one of our key strategies was partnering with licensed brands. So we would license their IP and we would create original games featuring their IP. And in fact, that was a similar strategy pursued by a company called Pixel that we acquired many years later, with whom now we have made a product called the Sandbox. So we share that DNA, I guess, in terms of our backgrounds. And in 2017, we had the opportunity to partner with a company called Axiom Zen, who was working on a hackathon project of creating a game on blockchain, and that game turned out to be CryptoKitties. So we were the publishers of CryptoKitties in Greater China, partnering with them on that project. And it was kind of our introduction to the possibilities of using blockchain in games. And it was, I guess it was kind of life-changing for us, because it was one of those things that when we saw it, we were just like, well, this just makes sense. We're not asking consumers to do anything different. We're essentially saying, look, come and buy your virtual currency and spend your virtual currency for virtual items in our game. And it just so happens that virtual currency is a fungible ERC20 token, and those in-game items are NFTs, playable NFTs. But at the end of the day, we're not asking consumers to do anything new, just have a better experience. And I think that really resonated on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're game developers, we're mercenary, we're always looking for new revenue streams. And so I think the other thing that really dawned on us was that in the wake of that sort of ICO boom of 2017, there were lots and lots of customers around the world holding tokens in projects that had yet to deliver any utility. And so we thought, look, if we make games that accept tokens, will they spend their tokens in our games? And, it was really a hunt for new streams of revenue, I think, that drove us in that direction. And and that was how the idea started. And so it was quite simple at first. But then, as we came to understand the technology more and as the industry progressed, I think it's become something much bigger.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the ICO boom. This is a question I've been thinking about quite a lot, and I'd love to have your thoughts. How much do you think the current crypto gaming boom is influenced by the profits that people have made that were just, early and lucky in, Ethereum or Bitcoin or other projects during the 2017 era?
So I think it does have an influence for sure. But I think actually the much bigger influence is the general interest in crypto as a result of inflation from pandemic government spending. I think that's the big one, because I think that that's been the biggest boon to overall crypto investment, particularly Bitcoin and to a lesser extent Ethereum. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of been the rising tide that lifted interest in crypto. And then once you start looking at what you can do in crypto, well, you know, Bitcoin's not very exciting. You buy it and then you sell it and then you buy it.
Hmm.
Um, but games can be fun, and so it's a way for people to engage with an interest that they have.
Yeah, totally. Like myself, I got into crypto through Bitcoin. As an economist, I was very much, I saw myself in the Austrian economic side, where anti-inflationary, and just Bitcoin made a lot of sense. Um, Talking about all of the new possibilities that blockchain brings to games, what excites you most? I have written down like shortly like a non-exhaustive list. You have real ownership of game assets. You
hmm
have community player ownership of the game itself through governance tokens. There's the potential for interoperability, composability. What do you think is key for you? What excites you most about
Hmm.
what blockchain can bring to games?
So all those things are cool, um, but I think actually the most exciting thing is the idea, and this is going to be really boring, and I'm going to show my age here, but the most exciting thing is that um, the idea that when gamers spend money in games, they don't lose it all.
Hmm.
It's just that simple, I think. It's the idea that when I play a game, I can actually now recycle my old digital content just the way I used to do with my cartridges or my DVDs or my CDs. There's a secondhand market for my digital items. And and I think this is important because it's nowhere near as sexy as content interoperability and all that other stuff. But the fundamental benefit of ownership is that there is some residual value in what I buy. And
Hmm.
I think there's been a lot of um, focus from the market on the speculative aspect. Oh, I'm going to buy this piece of rare content and it may go up in value. But I think actually the sea change for the industry is the fact that if I spend $100 on a game, I might get $1 back because today I'm guaranteed to get zero. And $1 is a big deal because when you think of it on an industry-wide basis, if that means I'll increase my spending in gaming by 10% because I know I'll get 10% back at the end of the day, then we've just moved the needle by $20 billion as an industry. So that's a big deal.
Hmm. That's interesting. Is that for you already enough of an advantage to bring blockchain to the masses, or do you just think this is the most important part? But we need to make full use of the other benefits that blockchain brings us as well.
So I think that that's the one that we can assume. I think the base case is that this is going to grow our industry by double-digit percentages. And I think our industry has been searching for growth, frankly, because gaming has become so difficult for all but the very biggest or the very smallest players, that everybody in the middle has been squeezed to the margins. And I say that as having been somebody working in the middle for a very long time and
Mm.
struggling there. Um, and and I think that that's that's the that's the base case of what we expect to be delivered. And then when you layer on top of that the idea that, as you said, you can have the potential for content interoperability, which can have, incredible consequences for the amount of fun that gamers can have. The idea that take something simple, I'm not a big MMO player myself or anything, but I always loved racing games. And one of the things about racing games is that historically they've always been siloed. You always have a Formula One game, or you have a rally game or a MotoGP game or something like that. But now with content interoperability, you can mash it up. And that's part of the fun that users have. I always want to know what it's like to drive a rally car against a motorcycle in downtown Tokyo. So that's because that's what games are about. That's what the fantasy and the fun is about. And the fact that you can bring your content around from environment to environment, I think will it will be something that will become so natural over time that people will wonder how they just, experienced games as single player individual environments in the past.
Hmm. I'm playing advocate of the devil here just to be sure.
Go for it.
But you talked about ownership of games and the fact that when you buy a game, you still have a chance to get something in return. A lot of people start considering that together with scarcity as an investment opportunity. Aren't you too concerned that thinking about economics and money and investments too much will take away the fun from games?
Not at all, because do you think of it as an investment opportunity when you buy a DVD for your Xbox? I mean, I
If
could make
there's
the same.
10,000 of them, maybe.
Well, there are, but they'll keep making them. I mean, they make special editions and things like that. But I think manufactured scarcity is something that we've always had in games. But I think one of the things that has been problematic is that often you find that, for example, in in-game items, there's manufactured scarcity of a particular booster or a particular sword or something like that. But then what happens, 6 months later, the developer's looking for revenue, so they make more. They make the next scarce item, and then they make the next scarce item. Um, and so it's really a kind of a false promise. I think that people will often speculate on things, just like you find people speculate on physical trading cards, like Panini style trading cards.
Hmm.
But fundamentally, that's a certain type of user who I think, is combining passion with whatever their own belief that something may be more valuable later, just like people who buy collectible stamps and all kinds of things like that. But I think for the mass market, I think what we're doing is we're presenting an opportunity to participate in an entertainment ecosystem that's much more fair to the player. Because at the end of the day, we're democratizing access to games and entertainment through this new medium. I think one of the things that you mentioned, which we didn't touch upon yet, was this idea of player-owned economies, and that's a very, very powerful idea. The idea that there can be some. First of all, there's going to be a great deal of ownership, and to a lesser extent, a measure of governance and input by the community. Because I think one of the things in games that's been difficult for people who are really passionate about certain games is that they generally have a limited lifespan because developers stop supporting games after a certain period of time when it either becomes not economical for them to continue to do so, or sometimes the developer just gets bored and they want to, the team wants to work on a new project and move on. But for the players who are part of that community, what do they do? Once they've played the game, there's no new content coming out necessarily, and you've got all those people there, and they are a community, but they're a community with no power because they have no agency over the future of their shared interest. Whereas in the case of a game that has, community ownership through a DAO or some other blockchain-based mechanism, they have the ability then to have an actual economy. So if the developer gets tired of supporting the game, theoretically, it's possible for them to hire a new developer to support their game for them because it puts the community first as opposed to the whims of the developer. And that's actually, I think, a much more fair environment for players.
Hmm. How realistic do you think that is? That another developer is going to be hired by a community to continue working on the game?
I think it's very realistic for successful games because successful games will have the financial power to be able to do so. And if you think in your mind of, what a successful game looks like, those handful of games that people do esports with, League of
Hmm.
Legends, World of Warcraft, etc., any one of those communities could easily hire the best developers in the world to work on their game because they have such large economies, in-game economies. And with blockchain, we turn them into actual economies. So, there's millions of dollars there to go and spend on development resources.
Yeah, that's true. Where do you see you said a bunch of benefits of blockchain gaming. Where do you see this go over the next 5 years? We're still early today.
Hmm.
And what part of the gaming industry as a whole will be, touched, so to say, by blockchain games or by blockchain technology?
Sure. Um, Honestly, I think all of it will. I think it's just a matter of time. I think it's a bit like when we introduced the internet to games, you know. At first we thought it was more of a feature to have an online game. And now all games are online because that's just the way it is. And the same thing happened with multiplayer and etc. So I think that blockchain will just become part of the plumbing and it will cease to be a feature, somewhere 3 to 5 years from now, and it will just be part of how games are. Um, and I also think that the mechanics of using blockchain will recede further and further into the background of user interface design. So, we'll abstract things like wallets and the way in which we possess and import and export owned content. I think will all evolve over time into much more user-friendly fashions. Right now, I think we have a variety of different systems that have been, built as siloed projects, and people are working really hard to try to smooth those interactions between ecosystems and chains and projects. And it will happen over time. I think the most I get the most excited when I look at the amount of progress that we've made as an industry just in the last 2 years since we started to garner mainstream attention. And when you look at what's happened in that period of time, I think, I get very excited about what the next 2 or 3 years holds because the pace of progress is astounding.
Hmm. I agree. Um, how do you see current free to play evolve? Like with in a blockchain gaming world, where like how does free to play work?
Sure. I think that I'm seeing lots of teams now experimenting. One of the areas that I see more traction on at the moment is experimenting with trying to keep um, two different types of communities engaged in a game economy at the same time. So a free to play community and essentially a blockchain community. This is
Hmm.
happening more on mobile, I find. And the idea is to try to find a way to onboard users who may be firmly Web 2 users and not necessarily, and kind of think of how to migrate them into a Web 3 experience. So, for example, one of the things that we did is we have a studio called Gamey that's created a series of mobile games called Arc 8. And the idea was to take a suite of casual games and offer blockchain-based rewards as prizes for people who have achievements in the games and people who are on the top of the leaderboards. So it's more of a traditional incentive scheme
Hmm.
in traditional games. But what happens is that those blockchain-based rewards can then be spent on collectible NFTs, and and the collectible NFTs are, they're robots with parts, and so you can collect all the parts and build them, and so there's a whole collecting mechanic there, which is kind of a meta game layered on top of the core casual gameplay. And then once you collect those robots, then there's going to be another game subsequently which you can use those robots in, which is more of a mid-core style game. So the idea is to see if we can bring users on a journey, onboarding them through a relatively casual experience, and then interesting them in blockchain by giving them rewards, and then interesting them in NFTs by giving them something to spend those rewards on, and then interesting them in a more, in-depth experience because here's how you can use those NFTs that you have.
I like that strategy. Taking a step back, Animoca has been making very large number of acquisitions and investments over the past years. Um, could you talk a bit more broadly about your strategy
Sure,
within the blockchain gaming world? What are you building with the company?
sure. So I think first and foremost, one of the things that we want to do is we want to ensure that there is an open and multi-chain competitive ecosystem environment. So we, you know, very much try to put our money where our mouth is in this philosophy and support projects across the ecosystem, regardless of what chain they're on, regardless of what kind of environment they're developing in, because we think that this multi-chain ecosystem and having interoperability amongst chains is very, very important to the health of keeping everything open. Because we think that's where the success of blockchain has come from, is this idea of open and composable assets. The idea that we build great products, but the ability to innovate on top of our neighbors' products is also a key superpower of blockchain and the open source community. And and so our investment strategy has been similar to that. We invest in game companies for the purpose of majority investments that's growing our studio business. So we will acquire game studios who make great games. But in terms of our minority investing activity, those are strategic investments where we invest in companies that are essentially building great stuff and enhancing the ecosystem. So we'll invest in other game companies who are building great Web3 games, or Web2 game companies where we can partner with them to help them on that journey to Web3, or what we call ecosystem investments, where they are, kind of the picks and shovels of the blockchain game industry. People who are making, layer one chains, layer two scaling solutions, wallets, DeFi, protocols, things that we would either be partners of or customers of, or who could benefit from working with other companies that we've invested in.
How actively do you try to orchestrate interoperability in between Animoca Brands and companies you invest in?
Every day. It's a constant struggle to try to do as much as we can. And I think that it happens on many different levels. And obviously the sort of holy grail is being able to have true content portability between environments, and that's the hardest. We're currently working on that with several of our titles. But I think it's much easier to foster cooperation, for example, of companies that are building tools and building games, for example, and putting them together, or doing things like fungible token marketing events, staking events, and things like that, where we can cross-pollinate game communities. So we try to do as much as we can.
If your job is to foster that within the companies you invest in, how likely do you think it is we'll see interoperability in between projects and games that are completely unrelated?
Oh, I think it's very likely. I think the key aspect is for us as an industry to try to establish certain kinds of standards, because that interoperability is going to require those standards. In the short to medium term, most of it is going to take the form of individual agreements between game environments. So for example, we do a lot of interoperability between the Sandbox, which has a lot of traction at the moment, and other titles. But the Sandbox has a very different art style than most other titles. And so interoperability has to be thought of through the lens of, well, how do I take my, immaculately 3D rendered item in one environment and bring it into the Sandbox where it's a 2D sort of pixelated art style? And what does that mean? Is there a translation mechanism for it, or does it happen on a bespoke basis just between these two games? And how do I handle things like, the amount of power that my character has in one environment? Does it then become powerless when I bring it into the other environment? So there's a lot of things that need to be thought about, and as an industry, we're working on it. But I think it's so early still that we're all, trying to do that while juggling getting our own products right to begin with.
Yes. And also communicating to the broader gaming industry that blockchain technology is not the devil.
Yes.
Not destroy fun in games.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. What is the value proposition that you present to companies you want to invest in? I mean, I'm an investor in the crypto gaming space myself. I know that there's a lot of money looking for, productive use in good games right now. How do you, sell Animoca Brands as an investor to potential companies?
I think for us, it's a relatively easy sale compared to pure financial investors, because we do represent something different, which is we're a builder. So we make games and we understand the challenges involved in making games, and we understand the challenges for traditional game companies making that journey to blockchain because we've done it ourselves. Um, and also, I think for people who are relatively early on their blockchain journey, we represent a reasonable amount of experience because, you know, I meet with companies every day who ask me, oh, which blockchain should I build on? What wallet should I use? All of these choices because there's so much technology available. And we have the ability to, to say to them, look, we would recommend X, Y, or Z on the basis that here, talk to my studio who just implemented this last week because we just built a game on Polygon or we built a game on Solana or we have this thing going on Immutable. So, talk to them and find out
Hmm.
firsthand what their experience is. And oh, custodial wallets? Okay, here, talk to this studio because we just built this over here for that. And I think that kind of experience is something that's very helpful for companies, and I think really differentiates us as an investor, you know, not just providing capital or high level introductions.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. What do you look for in a company or a team or a game to invest in?
Um, I think first and foremost, I think there has to be a shared philosophy, meaning we have to be comfortable that they really understand what it means to put blockchain into a game and to build a blockchain game. And I say that because, there's been an increasing number of traditional game companies who are now putting blockchain into their business plans to fund their games.
Hmm.
And, fair play. It's a great way to get funded at the moment, and I would do the same.
Hmm.
But I think in talking to those teams, some of them have really embraced and understood what it means to build in the blockchain universe, and others still don't quite get it. They're basically just putting, creating in-game items as NFTs, but there's no interoperability, there's no sense of being part of a wider community. And I think that's what blockchain is at its heart. So I think we look at shared mindset from the team, obviously experience and and access to resources because blockchain development resources are extremely scarce these days, um,
Hmm.
and and innovation. I think, like everybody else, we love to see great ideas. And I think we're still early enough in the cycle that I see completely novel concepts all the time. And
Hmm.
that's exciting.
I agree. I believe we still haven't found like a game that uses blockchain to the maximum, to like the full extent and all of its possibilities.
Hmm.
Very excited to discover it. Um, how do you think around when making an investment, tokens versus equity? What is your? Do you have a general stance as a company, or is that something you decide on a case by case basis?
I guess it's a case by case basis, although um, we would. I think we believe very strongly in a path to tokenization. So I think that we would probably be less interested in a pure equity investment where there was no intention of tokenization in the future, just
Hmm.
because that doesn't feel aligned with the overall mission.
Makes sense. Do you see a tokenized world where almost all company equity will be in some way, put as tokens on the blockchain and way more freely interchangeable?
Yes, for sure. And I think it's just a matter of regulators, financial
Mhm.
regulators, agreeing on standards.
I agree.
Because there's going to have to be regulation. I mean, if people are tokenizing their equity, you should be producing financial prospectuses and screening investors. I mean, there's a process for this so that you don't take advantage of people. But there, unfortunately, we don't have great standards for that yet. But we're getting there. We're getting there.
Are you actively talking to regulators about these things?
We're always talking to regulators. Yes. Well, because also we feel like it's incumbent on people who are, bigger players in the sector, to be
Mhm.
always doing that to help push the space forward. We need to do that because I think if we don't educate regulators, what we end up with is poor regulation because they don't understand exactly what we're trying to do. And we need to impress upon them that we're not bad actors. You know, this is just new
Hmm.
technology and it's a new way of doing something, but it should be embraced for all the great things it can do.
Hmm. On one hand, I understand that regulators get concerned when governance tokens are sold as securities to anyone who wants them, but on the other hand, I think you know I can see a world where a lot of people earn quite a lot of money just by working in the metaverse and perhaps even playing games. Um, do you think we'll be paying income taxes on our SLP um, gains in the
Yes.
future?
Yes, I think so. Well, and I think it's fair that we do, because
Hmm.
a job is a job, and so we have to have a foundation of law and what it means to have a job and to provide those services. I think we're just starting to now blend on and offline worlds. I do think though that alongside that, your taxes should pay for your internet connection, and everybody should have an internet connection.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's give and take.
Yeah,
But definitely, yes, definitely.
yeah, yeah. I agree. We talked about making investments in tokens earlier. One of the advantages of tokens is that they're more easily liquidatable like compared
Hmm.
to just private equity. Um, how do you, as a company, think about potential? At some point, you're vested. You can sell your tokens. How do you think around that? How do you manage these kind of things
Sure.
within the networks you invest in?
Um, well, simply put, we don't really sell tokens. So we're long-term holders. And this is because I think that, it's still too early to have this conversation from our perspective. I mean, this is more a conversation for several years from now, just because we think everything is headed in one direction, which is up. Um, and so we're very bullish on the sector. The other thing that's different about tokens is that tokens do have utility. So being a token owner is not just necessarily a buy and hold experience, but to maximize the value of being a token holder, there's work involved. So you need to, if you've got that SLP, you should be staking it, or you should be generating axes. You should be, investing in the ecosystem to maximize your return from being a token holder. Being a passive bystander is kind of missing the trick. So I think that for companies who are managing, um, you know, uh, crypto on their balance sheet, that's a very active role as opposed to a passive role.
So does that mean that you have a team that's responsible for actively managing your liquid positions, staking, and all these kind of things?
Yes.
That's really interesting. Okay, cool. All right, my next question was going to be a relatively open question, but I decided to spice it up a little bit and make it a bit harder for you. It is a would you rather question. And so the question is, would you rather only build on Ethereum, including all layer twos and sidechains, or never build on Ethereum? You can build on any other layer one and you know. So that's the question. You can take some time to consider your
Sure.
answer,
I
but
think honestly, if that was if it's a binary choice like that
mhm,
today, then
mhm,
obviously it would be Ethereum and layer twos. But that's not a function of technology. That's actually a function of liquidity and where the market is. Because at the end of
mhm,
the day, you want to build products where the customers are. And that's the most important thing. And most of the customers have congregated around Ethereum for various reasons. It has the most momentum. I don't know that that's going to be, permanent. Um, but at this moment in time, yeah, it's where the customers are.
I agree. It's one of the foundational strengths of blockchains is this concept of composability, and I think composability being able to take code and just reuse it for whatever application you want it yourself. And it feels like it's that composability strengthens network effects even more
Yes,
because the more developers you have on your chain, the more code they write, the more solutions they build, the more composability, and the faster you can evolve.
absolutely agree.
Yeah. But you do see a multi-chain world where you have the Ethereum ecosystem and then the Solana ecosystem and
Oh,
so on.
for sure. For sure. I mean, because also Ethereum's not necessarily the best technical solution, as people are very, very quick and eager to point out. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think it is possible that better technical solutions will come by, and but it will take time for the market and users to adopt better technology in lieu of, liquidity. So if you look at how many great auction sites are there on the internet, but people are still going to eBay because there's a customer base, even though
Hmm.
the UI may be, circa 1998.
Yeah, yeah. Um, my next questions are slightly more philosophical, but I'd love to have your thoughts on those. Um, why do you think Web3 is important, not only for games, but also for the future of the internet more broadly?
Sure. I think it's all about democratizing access, and it's about financial inclusion. So I think the thing about Web3 that is um, extremely exciting. I mean, I'll give you a personal example. So I go to conferences and meet people who are developing in the space, and having been to technology conferences for 25, almost 30 years, this is the first time in my career that I meet entrepreneurs from the African continent at conferences. And that says something. Why are they coming to conferences now and they never did before? Well, it's because blockchain actually has lower barriers to entry than pretty much any other technology in the past. And it's because it has finance built into the box, so to speak. It doesn't, you don't have to have access to venture capitalists from Sand Hill Road. You can build a blockchain business and you can fund it over the internet, and you can create great stuff basically in a bubble somewhere with an internet connection with no other financial infrastructure around you. It's why, I think that stat about Axie Infinity, having spawned more SLP wallets in the Philippines than there are credit cards, I think that says it all. And it changes everything. It changes things like the idea of what it means to be an esports athlete, because you no longer need to live in a big urban center where you can get sponsorship to support your profession. You can just be the best at a game and win the prize pool at the end of the game, and still sit in your parents' front room and playing that game. So I think the idea that this extends financial inclusion into every corner of the internet is, I mean, it's amazing, frankly.
Hmm.
We're just
Hmm.
making games, which is far less important than the import of what that means.
Yeah, that's true. How do you think about play to earn, play and earn, and blockchain gaming as a potential solution for UBI or universal basic income?
I think that the idea of it as a supplementary income source is tremendous, and to um, be able to participate in game economies as as a kind of a gig economy alternative, I think that's great. I mean, the idea that you can go and spend time working in games rather than having to, deliver restaurant meals or do some kind of potentially more hazardous outdoor work, I think is a great option for people. And so I think that that will definitely thrive.
And you say supplementary income. The way I look at things is I can see a world where through technology and automation, more and more people will not be able to, find a traditional, what we consider a traditional work. Um, do you see games as a potential, replacement of these traditional jobs where people can, spend the majority of their time working in?
Possibly, yes. Yes. I don't know how pervasive that can become, but yes, absolutely. Because I think
Hmm.
that games are just a form of interactive entertainment, and to figure out how to work with people at a distance is something that we've been doing since the 80s, since the idea of outsourced call centers. And more work behind the scenes of websites and businesses that we transact with online is happening in a decentralized fashion. And so what blockchain does is it enables that to happen on an even more massive scale, because you can essentially now decentralize your entire organization to the point where you can pay them directly to their computer and for their piecemeal work, And so I think that that work can take many different forms, and entertainment is definitely one of them. I mean, if to give you an idea, one of the things that I always found interesting was that in big Chinese game companies, China has some of the biggest MMOs in terms of in-game economies that have existed, and whale management of those high-spending players was always a very key component. And because of the economic dynamics, meaning that average wages in China were relatively low compared to
Mhm.
the amount that whales spend in games, um, you would have individual groups of players who would just be paid employees of the game companies playing against the whales because it was their job to make the whales experience as good as possible in the game. So when they're playing in the game, they're actually playing against the staff essentially in the game because they're subsidizing those people playing. And that's actually no different.
Interesting. That's a really good story. I didn't know that, and it makes a lot of sense. And it also answers partially my next question that I was going to ask, which was, how do you see a significant part of the player base earning money from a game becoming sustainable? Right? Where is the value being created?
Mm.
Um, and is your answer to that what you just said, that you have one very small part of the player base which essentially funds the others because they're the whales and they are willing to spend a lot of money on it?
Yes, I think there's that. And I think there's the idea that if we're really building a metaverse, then you're going to have in-game economies that are very complex. So it's not just simply going to be, one person fighting and one person defending in the old-fashioned sort of view of
Mm-hmm.
games, but you're going to have
Mm-hmm.
complex in-game economies, much more like, I think if anything has shown us the way, it's probably something like EVE Online,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a sophisticated in-game economy that is essentially a blockchain game that's 20 years old, if you will, because that community has been coordinating themselves on a mass player basis to perform tasks for years. And I think we'll see the same in a lot of blockchain game communities where it's not just fighting games and battle games, but it's city builder games. It's games where people are simulating what we do in the physical world. And as part of those simulations, they're doing work. And people get, and so there will be players who get enjoyment out of the fact that they're working. You know, Lots of us have many hobbies that other people would consider work, but we find them pleasurable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Um, I know you probably were aware of this. There was a lot of contention a few months ago around this centralization of Web3, where there's a lot of, small number of players who own a lot of the different networks because they were early, they invested early. There's, if you looked at centralization of a lot of, just blockchain networks like Ethereum, it's it scores pretty badly on the Gini coefficient of centralization of that you can calculate for a country. What are your thoughts on this? Is this something of concern to you?
No, I think it's just a reflection of the fact that we're still early. And if you think about it, the flippant comment would be, well, it's not that different from the physical world. Um, but I think that it's just a reflection of the fact that we have so few users. I mean, honestly, when you think of it's hard because we live in a bit of a bubble focused on this industry.
Mm-hmm.
But this is an industry that attracted what, $20 billion of investment last year, and there are apparently about 4 or 5 million players. So it's a very, very small industry. And as
Yeah,
you think about bringing on another 100 million players, all of a sudden that ownership decentralizes very quickly.
that's fair. Yeah. How do you think around digital property rights and IP within the world of Web3?
Sure.
This is something I've been thinking around a lot, and it's complex.
Sure. It's actually it's relatively clear. The idea is that it needs to be you need to think about it in a way that still works within the framework of intellectual property and copyright law that we have, because your ability to enforce copyright is founded in law. And so when I think about NFTs, and this is how I explain it to licensors that we work with, when you create an NFT that has, an NFT is in and of itself an end product. which means that, for example, I can, excuse me, I can go outside and take a picture of my car, and I can make it into an NFT of a photograph of my car. And I own the copyright to that photograph because I created that photograph. But if I want to make a playable NFT in my, Rev Racing game of my Volkswagen van that's sitting outside, I can't do that because I don't own the IP to the design of that van. I can take a photo because I own the van and it's my car, but I don't own the IP of the car. I only own the car, and there's a difference. And the same thing happens with the NFT, so that I can sell an NFT of that car only if I own the copyright, like a 3D model of the car as an playable NFT. I can only do that if I have the copyright from the original creator of that intellectual property. Because otherwise, if I don't have their permission, then I'm violating copyright and I'm subject to being sued by them for doing so.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Interesting. I always ask a similar question to all of my guests, and that is, could you share with us a bold prediction about blockchain games?
A bold prediction.
Yes.
Would it be bold to say that all games will be blockchain games within the next 5 years?
Actually, I consider that bold, but you already said that, Anna, so maybe.
But I think I think that another bold prediction. I think a bold prediction will be that it's the unknown that's the excitement. Meaning that I think that if we look back to when NBA Top Shot came out and Axie Infinity was already out, I don't know that anybody would have ever expected what would have subsequently happened to Axie Infinity. And so I think that the bold prediction is that this year we will see more of these kind of unforeseen events that have this level and magnitude of implications for the wider industry. Because, go back not even 12 months ago, and the idea of play to earn and the idea of a guild and, how many other ideas did we not even have yet as an industry?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet that's all anybody's talked about for the last 6 months.
That's true.
So my prediction is not that I can predict something, but that the unpredictable will happen this year.
Okay, that's pretty safe. But I like it. I like it. Good. All right. This was really fascinating. Robby, thank you so much for your time. I hope our listeners enjoyed it too. This was, the interview with Robby Yung from Animoca Brands. We hope you enjoyed. And with that, the Metacast is out, and we look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.